Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Howard. I'm a Legislative Associate with NCAI, and I will also be your webinar administrator today. On behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, I'd like to thank you for attending this presentation on the Native Financial Education Coalition update. Currently, all audience phone lines are muted until conclusion of each section of the presentation, but we will be allowing Q&A intermittently throughout the presentation. If at any point during the presentation you have a question, questions can be asked by typing them in the questions box or using the raise hand option on your webinar control panel. There may also be a lag time between transition of slides, but if you just give it a couple of seconds, it will process. This webinar will also be recorded for future reference and those that were unable to attend today. I will go ahead and pass it off to Sherry Salway-Black.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Native Financial Coalition updates. As Brian mentioned, my name is Sherry Salway-Black. I work for the National Congress of American Indians. Also joining me today is Joanna Donahoe with Seven Sisters Community Development Consulting Group, who is working with us on the Native Financial Education Coalition. Today's topics we've scheduled from 3 to 4:30, and if we finish early, but we wanted to make sure we left adequate time for discussion and for ideas. But today's topics are going to be, we're going to go over the survey results, and everyone should have received a copy of the survey report yesterday in the email that I sent out. And we're also going to go over the results of the February 26th planning meeting, and we're going to also talk about events for Financial Literacy Month, which is April, and then some next steps for that. And Joanna and I are going to tag team, and Joanna is going to go ahead and start first on the survey results.
Great. Thank you, Sherry, and hello to everyone. I want to thank you all for calling in. And as Brian mentioned, we will kind of stop along the way to get some comments and questions. But first we wanted to review the results of the survey. I want to thank everyone who participated in the survey. And we conducted a survey last month. And basically what we did was email out to the NFEC listserv that Sherry has compiled, and it's close to 400 folks now who are part of the listserv, about I think 375, something like that. So it's a growing list of folks who are interested in supporting financial education efforts in Indian country. So we administered the survey last month, distributed to the listserv. We received about a 15% response rate, 56 respondents, which is a great cross section of people who are interested in these issues. And basically, it was an online survey that asked 8 questions about NFEC priorities to get input from the interested folks to help us have some direction on how to move forward. And the part of the purpose of the survey was not only to inform the movement generally, but also to give some specific information for the planning meeting, which Sherry is going to talk about in a minute, that happened on February 26th. So just to jump right into the survey results, what I'm doing is just kind of summarizing some of the highlights, some of the key points that came out of the survey. And so on the first question that we're talking about this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me, we asked the participants in the survey to tell us what their entity did to promote financial education. And it was interesting to see that the majority of the folks who responded were involved with youth financial education. Second most frequent response was the consumer financial education, and then followed by policy advocacy, free tax prep EITC outreach, earned income tax credit outreach, as well as research. So it was interesting to see the range of activities that were the most common of the respondents, and in particular that free tax prep and earned income tax credit outreach was ranked so high on the list of activities. So that gave us a sense for what folks did. On the next slide, you'll see we asked what the biggest barrier was to promoting financial education in Native communities. And what ranked at the top of the list was a lack of resources, also a lack of capacity. Third, inadequate knowledge of Native communities, and this obviously was coming from financial education partners from outside of Indian country who felt like their knowledge of the communities kind of stood in the way for them being effective. Another barrier was that there was not an effective way to measure impact, that the activities were happening, but there wasn't a good way to tell whether or not they were being impactful, and then also a lack of community interest, just in terms of the folks in the Native communities not being really that interested in the services that were offered. And this particular question generated a lot of discussion. Sherry's going to talk about that when she talks about what happened at the February 26th meeting. But it definitely, people were really interested to see the feedback on this particular issue. Okay, so the next area that we asked about was about priorities. We asked the participants to rank their top 3 priorities, and this list are the ones that got the highest response rate. So really the first bullet about serving as a clearinghouse was the most popular response, the most popular priority, and that is that NFEC should serve as a clearinghouse for all of its members to share information amongst each other and with the public in general. The next 2 bullets were tied for second, and that's collecting and publishing best practices and developing a public awareness campaign. These are areas that, as I said, tied for second. And then the last 2 bullets tied for third, and that's policy advocacy and engaging tribal leaders. And the idea here was advocating for policies on the federal, state, and tribal level, and then obviously engaging tribal leaders more into the financial education process in this space. Next, we asked about what participants thought what should be part of NFEC's organizational and governance structure. And clearly what people wanted to see the most was a website as a place to go to get information about Native financial education efforts and resources and things like that. Secondly, the second area where they felt like NFEC should focus is on working committees. And then next, having an advisory board to kind of steer the direction of the NFEC. And then a newsletter was the next area. So this, basically people were most concerned with sharing information and getting the word out. And again, this generated some discussion at our meeting in terms of, what working committee should really look like, and Sherry will address that when she talks about the meeting itself. Okay, a couple more slides to talk about the results of the survey. We did ask a question about, we wanted to get a sense for what people's thoughts were about how NFEC should be structured as a corporate entity, or whether or not it should incorporate and become separate. And the overwhelming majority of folks felt like NFEC should remain an initiative or a program of NCAI. Some folks thought, well, incorporation and becoming a separate entity could be a long-term goal. A handful thought that NFEC should just completely separate, but clearly the majority felt like it is positioning itself under NCAI was the place to be for now. So that was the response there. Next, we asked about what types of things that the respondents would be willing to do to support NFEC. And again, the focus here was on information sharing, really kind of getting the word out, like asking for NFEC to help to craft the message, but then the members would be willing to kind of disseminate the message. So disseminating was what people were most willing to do. Volunteering to work on committees was next. Participating in the awareness campaign, in an awareness campaign, and also publishing articles in their publications. So really, again, relying on NFEC as an entity to help craft the message, but then members are definitely interested in help getting the word out. So the last thing we're going to talk about now, just in terms of the feedback from the survey, is what ideas people had for the April events. Again, that was another one of our objectives of the survey and of the February 26th meeting, was to figure out, okay, what do we do? How do we head forward? But then, because of the timing of Financial Literacy Month, which is April, we wanted to get feedback on what exactly folks were interested in doing to commemorate Financial Literacy Month at this particular point in the development of NFEC. So the most common responses were to really support a series of local events. So having things happening in the community, either that were going to happen and kind of showcase them, or encouraging events to be organized in commemoration of Financial Literacy Month. The second response was a tribal leaders roundtable, to have a session that would get tribal leaders to discuss some of the issues surrounding financial education. And then finally, putting efforts behind a national awareness campaign. And we wanted to get people's feedback on what they thought made the most sense, and then the next step, of course, is to talk about, how I actually would do that. But before I turn it back to Sherry to talk about what happened at the February 26th meeting, I just wanted to pause here for a moment and ask folks if they had either any questions about the survey, any comments about some of the things that you saw in the results from what Sherry emailed yesterday, or what we talked about here on the slides, and even ask if you have feedback specifically on some of the ideas, or kind of feedback on what was proposed for the April events. So if you have a question or a comment, you can either raise your hand or type something in the chat box, and Brian will read it out or unmute your line to talk. So Brian, let me know if anyone has anything.
All right, we'll just give it a couple of seconds, and I don't see anyone raising their hands, but we'll just wait a little bit in case people are typing a question.
Okay, great. And we were really pleased with the response on the surveys, and the people have been very engaged in the whole process, just in terms of their willingness to participate in the meetings, the webinars, as well as the in-person meetings that we've had so far.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions at this time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. So I'll go ahead and turn it back to Sherry, and she'll talk a little bit about the February meeting.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. And again, the survey report that I emailed to folks yesterday has a lot of really good information in it that people added in addition to the questions, too. So it's really helpful to look through that as well. So we did have our planning meeting on February 26th here at the embassy. We had about 25, 26 participants, and they represented a broad range of, we had tribal colleges represented, we had Native CDFIs, Native nonprofits, one or two non-Native nonprofits that work in the financial education area. We had the EITC network represented, and federal government reps. We had the FTC, the FDIC, the SEC, and we're getting all these alphabet things here, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and we had HUD represented. And I know there were a number of people who were unable to come at the last minute, and who I've seen are on this call today, so I'm really happy about that. We did have an agenda for the meeting, and as a lot of these meetings go, we sort of went off agenda, but managed to really accomplish quite a bit. So my goal today is really to help convey that. So we did discuss the survey results, and as Joanna just mentioned, one of the key findings was that people thought there was a lack of resources available for financial education, and the group discussed that perhaps it's a lack of knowledge about the resources that are out there. So it spoke to us about being able to identify some of the sources of financial support for financial education. Another one was that the group felt very strongly about that we have to identify a teachable moment to overcome the lack of community interest, and that was very important too. And it also related to the need that the group raised around tying financial education to something else, that it may be more difficult to have it as a standalone course or focus, but including it with other activities is really critical. And also stress the need for experiential learning and how people are able to learn more effectively that way. So the group, and we'll send you the notes from that meeting, which is going to have a lot more detail on here. But as we move forward, we talked about what were some of the successes of the past of NFEC when it was in existence previously. And this really generated, there were on-the-ground pilots, just to share with folks. There was a significant information sharing in Indian country. The Native financial education issues were on the table. Obviously, we had policy forums that were in there. So those were some of the pieces that we thought had been successes before. And this led us into also talking about what are some of the trends. What has happened that's changed, not just in Indian country, but maybe more broadly as well, since NFEC, maybe since 2009, when it perhaps went dormant. And we needed to consider that in the sense of where the organization could go moving forward. So some of those were, there's been a real growth in behavioral finance, behavioral economics theory in terms of wanting to actually build financial capability more so than focusing on financial education. Demographic shifts, particularly in Indian country, we talked about, and these were just when you get the notes, you'll see more examples of this, but of grandparents raising children. We talked about how young the Native population is, that 42% are under 25 years old. There is really an expanded access to technology in Indian country. We have a new government entity, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which plays a role in the field, so that so thinking about what is new in our environment that would impact positively perhaps or negatively the redevelopment of NFEC. Also recognition that financial health brings community wealth. And we had some, I'll talk a little bit more about this later on when we look at the 4 priority areas that people talked about, that financial decisions, personal financial decisions, or even household financial decisions are not done in a vacuum, but that they really impact the community wealth, as this says here. And then we also talked about a growing need for consumer protection, that this is really happening in Indian country with the number of settlements that have come out, increased per capita with some tribes, increased incomes as tribal enterprises grow and people have jobs, and then perhaps more exposure, as technology gears up, there's more opportunities in essence for people to have a need for consumer protection. So that this was very much a new area that we needed, or an expanding area we needed to focus on. So what the group came to is, and again, just to let people know, we had structured the agenda to talk about how NFEC was structured in the past, and it was structured around youth and tribal colleges and EITC network. I can't remember the other ones, but there was a need in the group not to maybe go down that way, but to really talk about what are the priorities, and that's where these emerge from, these new NFEC priorities. And the first one is bringing partners together. So matching needs and resources, and we spent a great deal of time talking about that. This would include opportunities for peer learning, conference workshops, identifying the players, sort of scanning national, regional, and local levels, holding regional convenings, the website in terms of what role can a website play in bringing people together. So that's what's intended by bringing partners together, a fuller explanation. The next category, research and best practices, the long name of it was collecting, publishing, disseminating best practices. And, you know, we talked about, as when you're talking about Indian country, the issue of data, gaps in research, but trying to look at how we can pull this kind of information together, leverage the work of members, elevate existing research, but also talk about folks as what constitutes best practices and how we can prioritize data collection, access to existing data at federal agencies. People also discussed some funding sources for research at tribal colleges, but really looking at highlighting best practices and how we can move that forward. So the next one is promoting awareness or awareness campaigns, and this was awareness campaigns at all levels. So we talked about perhaps a targeted awareness campaign to tribal leaders, and what would that involve, and we also so perhaps when we talk about what could happen in April, we talked about this tribal leader forum, but we also talked about holding a meeting at NCAI's mid-year conference as well. So thinking about what do we need to do to promote awareness to tribal leaders. And then we looked at other possibilities, you know, with policymakers. How do we focus on awareness with policymakers? And we talked about the methods, the media channels for doing that, and how do we engage Native radio stations, and how do we use newsletters and using webinars to do that. Let's see. And the group was also very clear that we want to tell the story of the NFEC members or partners, not NFEC itself. That we didn't really want to focus on NFEC as an institution, but as of the members of NFEC. Then the last priority was community well-being, and we discussed this quite a bit, and I know some folks who are on the call were also part of the meeting, but it really talked about this, how our personal and household financial decisions affect the broader Native community. And we talked about things around the financial implications of family situations, but it raised some unique discussions around is that approach to looking at more so the financial decisions in a community setting and what that means as a way to help instruct folks, look at the impact of predatory lending. You know, we could tie it into the transitory nature of money, the reservation, the leakage off of reservation, looking at a shift to debit cards, that we're talking about our financial decisions in maybe a larger economic system, but engage people in that conversation so they understand that. And we have quite a bit. You'll see when you get the notes that we go on quite a bit about community well-being and this role. So we also had themes that came out of this work too. Again, we wanted to focus on building the capacity of NFEC members, not NFEC itself. It's a movement, not an institution. To focus on regional and local levels, as well as national. There was not anything to say we knew there was a key piece for national, but we also wanted to look at regional and local. And engaging tribal leaders was so critical. So those were sort of the four main themes that had come out in the meeting. So that's what I have right now for just an update on the meeting. We'll be talking more about Financial Literacy Month and the events that came out at the meeting in the next section, so we haven't forgotten about that. But I want to take a break now to see if anyone have any questions about the meeting, or also if anyone who's on the call who was at the meeting who thinks you know, that I've left something out or you want to stress something in addition, that would be great as well.
And again, if you have a question, just use the raise the hand option on your webinar control panel, or you can send a question under the questions box and we'll address it that way.
It just as a, we didn't select like we're going to have this working committee and that working committee, but in those priority areas, if you're interested in those areas, they may have elements, for example, in bringing partners together, they may have elements of youth, of consumer protection, so, or how would this translate to tribal colleges? So we're not forgetting about those key constituent areas, but they would be integrated, as it appears from the discussion that we had, those would be integrated into the into those priority areas.
And
okay, no one's inquisitive today. Anna, do you have anything to add, or do you want to go into Financial Literacy Month?
Just really quickly, I'll just add one quick thing in that about since you just raised the working committees. The preference of the group was to not necessarily have working committees just for the sake of doing committee work, but they wanted to treat them more like more project-oriented, more results-oriented. So meaning that groups of folks might work together on a particular project that might involve national, local folks, but it just wouldn't, they just really didn't want to focus on just an institution or building a structure. They wanted to focus on results and making things, helping to support the efforts that are happening on the local level, the local and regional level. But raising them up to the national level to share that, for purposes of engaging tribal leaders on the national level, policy advocacy on the national level, things like that, and bringing together resources. So,
thanks for remembering that. Yeah, that was a key point.
Okay, so shifting to the activities in April. Based on the feedback from the group and also from the survey, what we're looking at doing is, this is kind of what's on the table now, supporting a series of local events, and that could, as I mentioned earlier, be things that may be happening anyway that we can showcase and highlight, things that we might encourage to happen through existing programs. This isn't we want to really shine a spotlight on good work that's happening in the field to help raise it up and to be able to share to share those successes with other communities so that they can look at them as best practices and really kind of acknowledge the hard work that's happening in the field and kind of use that as to celebrate Financial Literacy Month and commemorate Financial Literacy Month. So that network of local events, we will kind of put the word out to say, all right, what's happening and what can happen and here's some ideas and what you can do, and to really get feedback from the field about what's happening. So that's one thing. The other thing is to start building the website. Again, that was one of the most popular recommendations, and is something that NCAI definitely is looking at the best approach to that. So, and that this might be a good time to say that we're not sure that all of this stuff will happen by April, but we're definitely these are the things that were put on the table, and we're trying to figure out the best approach. The Tribal Leader Roundtable, Sherry and I both have mentioned in the different parts of the conversation. We're not sure what that would look like. We know that in this environment, it's especially with the uncertainty at the federal level with the budget and leaders being concerned about limited budgets, and we don't know that we necessarily would have a large group of people fly to be in one room together. We might look at something more virtual. We're exploring different types of technology that might work for something like this. We also want to more specifically showcase best practices, unlike the series of local events where we would just kind of shine a spotlight on something, the best practices would be something that we write up in more detail and distribute through a release, post on the internet. But it would really be taking a deeper look at some of the financial education efforts that are happening, that are ongoing, that we can take the opportunity in February to share more information about on the national level. And then launching a national awareness campaign. At the meeting, we talked about things like lapel pins and magnets that would list the top 10 things that you can do in your community to promote financial education. We talked about things like little credit card holders that you could slide your cards in that would have some type of a message or tagline relevant to Indian country. So there's all different types of approaches and components that could be incorporated into the awareness campaign. One of the overarching ideas was to do a toolkit that could be sent to the local level to folks who are interested, or even to regional tribal organizations. But the idea here is really to follow models that have worked before, like the native vote model or others, where again the message is developed and pushed out into the field, into the tribal level, for folks to really leverage resources and customize on the local level. So those are kind of what's on the table now. I hope that you guys, before we move into next steps, can give some feedback. And I guess let me just ask the question in several ways. One is, do you have any general or specific feedback about any of these ideas that you want to share? And two, if you know of any specific events that are happening or could be encouraged to happen, if you represent a local initiative or work with a local initiative that you think might be willing to do something in conjunction with Financial Literacy Month, we'd really love to hear about that from you. And if you are interested in, and also if you know of a best practice that you'd like to put forward, we'll of course go out with a more formal request for information, but we thought we'd throw that out there to you as well to see if you guys had any input. And of course, we also are looking for folks who want to help us think through what a tribal leader roundtable might look like, and what virtual approach might work the best. So let me just stop there, and feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat box to share any ideas you have.
And Joanna, I wanted to also just reference one of the ideas we had talked about is a virtual meeting in which we had Jefferson Keel, the president of NCAI, in some sort of town hall setting. Again, perhaps we haven't thought all the way through on what the technology is we would need. So that's one idea. And then I also wanted to update you on a meeting that we had last Friday with with representatives from the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Financial Protection Board. We were invited, NCAI was invited to this meeting last Wednesday, and it was last Friday, and it was about financial consumer protection, and we weren't quite sure, what the agenda was. And when Peter Morris, Leslie Wheelock, myself went from NCAI, and then there was one tribal leader there, Gary Hayes from Ute Mountain. And we were in a room with about 15 to 20 federal folks, including the number 3 at Justice, Tony West, and they were very eager to identify what they could do for consumer protection in Indian country. And both the FTC person and CFPB person knew that their staff had worked on the Keep Siegel alert and the Cobell information that went out, so they were very well informed. It was the head of the CFPB Enforcement Bureau and also the Deputy Director of Consumer Protection at FTC. So I throw that out, and I think the reason they held this, it was like 4 o'clock on a Friday, last Friday, was because it was National Consumer Protection Week. And I think, they may have been discussing, this would be really great to, learn more about Indian country as a first step. So I, really looked at it positively. But it's a potential that in April, perhaps there's some type of government effort that, we could, again, obviously it doesn't have to be fully formed by April. Maybe it's an announcement that there will be a consumer financial protection initiative with all of these participating agencies. So that's also something to think about. And they seem very interested in that idea. We didn't talk in detail, but just to raise that. So any questions? Or?
Yeah, we have one question from Mr. Levon Henry. His question is, as part of the National Awareness Campaign, is there a plan to hit the Gathering of Nations powwow in Albuquerque, New Mexico?
When is that?
Is that the last? I think it's the last weekend in April. Usually, I think.
Okay, well that might be something really good to talk with, because we did talk about the last week, and then the last 2 days of April are in that first week along with the beginning of May. So looking at opportunities in there to really do something. So that would be, I'd be really interested to hear more about that.
And I don't know if Levon is still online, but Levon, is that something you've participated in the past, either like by having a table set up, or we can follow up with him, but if he's had luck with reaching folks that way through that venue.
Yeah,
and
I would imagine that there's some way to, some exhibit space or something.
Yeah, they've got exhibits, and I'm just guessing on the date, Sherry. I'm just going. Oh yeah, April 25th, 26th, 27th. And they generally have nonprofits that have tables and stuff set up, and it's high attendance of community members, so from all over.
So that might be a good, again, we could have information, but having a little tchotchke might be a really good thing to do there that would just call attention to this.
Definitely. Thank you for suggesting that, Levon. Any other ideas or questions or feedback?
I'm unable to mute his phone line, but I can follow up with him later as well.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go on to the next steps here. And, I wanted to also talk about, well, we'll talk about it when I get to it. So the next step basically is the immediate one, is focusing on planning April activities. So we would look to this group that's on the phone right now, along with the, and maybe there's about 3 or 4 on the phone who were at the meeting, and then there's about 13 or 14 others who were not at the meeting, along with those at the meeting as sort of a core planning group that will, look to schedule some very specific kind of phone calls on, probably within the next week to 2 weeks, about the April planning activities, so we could identify local events, just as Levon did with the Gathering of Nations, looking at how we can gather best practices, and looking at perhaps there's a template that we could send out to folks to have them submit them, and we can post them. Planning the Tribal Leader Roundtable, and again, I think the group on the 26th really thought it was important to have tribal leaders express the importance they felt that financial education played in the economy. So I think that's a really critical piece for us to try to work on to do that. And how can we do it virtually? Is there a way that we could have Jefferson Keel do PSAs? So there's some ways I think that we can do things fairly quickly to address that. And then addressing communications needs. Joanna mentioned the website, and I had a conversation yesterday at our senior staff meeting about how we could move forward with this website. And we will be. I'm just not sure how it could all come together by April. We're going to try to do that, but maybe it's at the absolute end of April. But that is something that we are going to move forward on. And then on the we do have the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. Their community dividends newsletter is doing an article on NFEC that will come out in mid-April, so we do know that's there already, so we could look at having that as some materials, ready-to-make materials. We also want to plan the NCAI mid-year workshop, and we talked about that at the planning meeting in a sense of looking at having a pre-meeting, perhaps a half-day pre-meeting or a half-day post-meeting. And the reason we're doing that, rather, we could also have a breakout session, but at mid-year our breakout sessions tend to be very limited, the number that we have, because it's also our Tribal Leader Scholar Forum, and one whole day is devoted to the research pieces. But so, just to kind of keep that in mind, we would need folks to help plan that workshop and how we could engage tribal leaders who are going to be coming there. And it is in Reno, Nevada, the last full week of June this year. And then continue working with the core planning group. So following up this phone call, we'll be doing trying to set up, a working, not a webinar so much as a working conference call, and those folks who are in the area, to definitely try to do something here in the embassy with conference call-in capability to take this planning forward at this point. So, Brian, any questions or comments?
No, like I said, if you have a question, you can use the questions box and type it in there, and we can answer it over the phone. Or you can use the raise your hand option, and I can unmute your phone line.
Sherry, while we're giving people time to respond, perhaps they're not responding because they're listening to the announcement that the new Pope is from Argentina.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, from South America. It's Pope Francis I.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's hot off the presses.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's probably what folks are probably having their Internet Explorer open to the news page. Watch that. Okay, well, I know folks' time is valuable, so we will include everyone who's on this call today, and those folks who were at the meeting. Well, we'll make announcements. We'll send materials out to everyone on the list. But as far as the opportunity to, within the next week to 2 weeks, probably have a number of phone calls to really talk more specifically about April and what can be done. And we'll be getting more information ourselves as far as Jefferson's availability, talking with our technical people as far as what kind of things we could do virtually for a Tribal Leader Forum, and meet internally and have that available for our call. So, one more chance if anyone has any questions. If not, email me after the call as well, too. We can do that.
All right, we do have one question from Thelma Pillay. I just unmuted your line.
Okay. One of the things that I actually thought about after I left the meeting, because we're trying to reach out throughout the Native communities across the U.S., and in the past, I know that most of the tribes do have schools on the reservations as well. In the past, when I did a lot of work with Toastmasters, and we wanted to reach out to parents, and also with NeighborWorks, I did quite a bit of work with them at home buying fairs and all, and we actually utilized the schools to go to the principals and to schedule sessions through working with the principal and a committee of people at a number of different schools throughout the Washington metro area, and crafted a letter so that the kids could take it home as well. And on nights of PTA meetings, announcements were made as well. And so this may be one of those situations where we may be able to utilize the schools on the reservations as well to sort of get information out to everyone about the upcoming events, especially in those particular areas. Just a thought.
Great, thank you. And I know Joanna does work for NeighborWorks as well.
Yes, and you know, actually, Thelma, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the National Indian Education Association is an organization that I know is on our list of folks who haven't been at the table yet during this round, but definitely would love for them to be. So I think if we reach out on the national level, they can help convey some of that information to their members.
Yeah, because that would be wonderful, I think, a great way to get it out there.
Yeah, especially since the focus is youth.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. All right, I don't see any other questions, so.
Okay, everyone, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and I'll be following up with you before the week is out.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brian.
Bye.